Hello everyone, and welcome to the third live broadcast for LORCA Live. My name is Andrew Rowan, and I'm the Managing Director of Plexel, and I'll be your host for today. We're now halfway through our week-long virtual conference. Thank you so much for joining us again for our celebration and showcase of the UK cyber startup ecosystem. Today, we're going to focus on the cyber investment landscape. Since the country went into lockdown, Plexel has been working hard to support early-stage companies raising investment in difficult economic circumstances, whilst also campaigning to ensure that those startups in the local area and around the UK are able to access the financial support they need. We've been working with Bowhurst, the research platform tracking the UK's fastest-growing companies, to highlight the impact of coronavirus on the startup community and the need for urgent support. The pandemic has had a serious impact on investment for all startups across the UK, with fundraising levels down by 26% compared to last year, and the number of transactions reduced by 20% year on year. However, cybersecurity is an exception to this rule. After a record-breaking year for UK cyber investment in 2019, cyber startups have been remarkably resilient and managed to attract significant levels of growth capital. We're so proud to say that nearly 70% of all investment raised by UK cyber startups since March has gone to LORCA cohort companies. But we can't ignore an underlying issue. Only 2% of funding has been secured by those raising investment for the first time, and this risks a lost generation of startups. Today, we've gathered investors and entrepreneurs to unpick this investment activity for us, explain the growth opportunities for entrepreneurs, and the warning signs that show funding obstacles cyber still needs to overcome. Our first guest is a close collaborator with both Plexel and LORCA. I'm delighted to welcome Henry Horwood, who's Head of Research and Consultancy at Bowhurst. Henry has been providing the analysis that has been informing Plexel's startup tracker, and he loves data more than anyone I know.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you about the latest investment trends in the UK generally, and in cybersecurity in particular. First, I'll start by telling you a little bit about Bowhurst and how we track the UK's private, most ambitious businesses. We do this by looking for companies that meet one or more of a handful of triggers, these triggers signaling to us that the company is either growing or has significant ambitions for growth. For example, we look at all of the companies that receive innovation grants from Innovate UK and Horizon 2020, the EU programme. We look at companies undergoing MBOs. We look at companies where we can see from their headcount that they are scaling up rapidly. And in particular, about half of the companies that we track have supported their growth through raising equity investment. So that's the trigger I'm going to focus on today. Since 2011, we've tracked nearly 45,000 equity investments into the UK's private startups and scale-ups. And those have been worth nearly 80 billion to those companies. These equity investment rounds comprise everything from friends and family rounds. So if you started a company tomorrow and raised 10K from your family, we'd start tracking your business at that point, all the way through to £100 million growth rounds that you might read about in the press. So without further ado, looking at the investment trends since lockdown in 2020 and comparing them with the same calendar period in 2019, we can see, as Andrew mentioned, that both deal numbers and the amounts invested are significantly down on the previous year. However, I was determined to come today and talk about these numbers with a bit of optimism. And actually, these numbers aren't as bad as we feared during the very beginning of the lockdown. At that point, we saw a huge number of deals being tabled and deferred. But most of those weren't deferred indefinitely. They were put off to a very near date in the future. We've actually started to see the majority of those deals start to happen. A bit further into lockdown, we were worried, well, are we just seeing the sort of residual momentum? Equity investment deals take 6 to 9 months on average to negotiate. So are these the deals that were in the pipeline already? Fortunately, at this juncture, we're very happy to be able to say that we've seen new deals happening, ones that weren't even in discussion before lockdown. In these numbers, nonetheless, we still see a 20% decline in the number of deals. However, these are representing only vanilla equity deals. So convertible rounds aren't included in these numbers. So once you factor in the activity from, for example, the future fund, you can start to see that the numbers are really not too far from the levels they were at in 2019, which, given everything that's happened, to me is a cause for optimism. However, to throw a bit of pessimism into the mix, the area where we can see a bit of a problem starting to develop is at companies that are raising for the very first time. So these are effectively the stock of new companies reaching investors and raising investment. The number on the left here, showing this nearly 60% decline in the amount invested, isn't the one I'm too worried about. What we're actually starting to see is deals happening, but at a smaller size. This is quite sensible during the environment we find ourselves in. A lot of startups that would have raised larger rounds have modified that on the basis of the fact that they may not need an office now, and it may not be practical for them to hire an office, so that the value of the deals has gone down, but they are still happening. However, the 33% decline in the number of deals does suggest that a problem's being stored up for the future. If these companies aren't raising their angel investment rounds now, they won't be around to receive the growth capital investments and fuel the growth in jobs that these companies have the potential to do so. So that's where we're seeing a bit of a risk, but the true impact of that won't be felt until 2021 at least. To focus now on cybersecurity in particular, and I'm very glad to be able to end on a more positive note when talking about cybersecurity. Already this graph that you can see here is relatively positive, 2020 being a better year for the amount invested than 2018, and actually seeing more deals than last year. But since I created this slide, we've actually seen new deals happen. A very large $200 million round into Sneak or Snook, depending on how you prefer to pronounce it, takes the 2020 figure way beyond either the amount seen in 2018 and in 2019. So that's very reassuring news to see that the cybersecurity sector, which it's sort of funny to think that in 2018 was actually comparatively nascent, is now achieving year-on-year growth in the amount invested into these kinds of businesses. So hopefully I've created a platform for a bit of optimism for the rest of your speakers today to talk to you about.
Thank you so much, Henry. That was a fantastic look at the investment trends shaping the cyber sector. Of course, any startup ecosystem is only as strong as the investors fueling its growth. With the levels of growth capital in the UK cyber ecosystem are still below the likes of the US and Israel, we have seen a marked increase in the investment activity over the course of the last 18 months. Our recently released LORCA report showed that funding for cybersecurity startups increased by 940% year on year in the first 8 weeks of lockdown. I'm so delighted to be able to welcome a panel of some of our most active cyber investors currently operating in the UK, and to discuss the challenges and opportunities facing cyber entrepreneurs looking to raise funds. So welcome to my panel. So firstly, can I introduce Karen McCormack? She's the Chief Investment Officer at Beringia, the prominent venture capital fund supporting early stage businesses nationwide. Welcome, Karen.
Hi.
Secondly, can I introduce Will Sheldon, who's Vice President at Accel, one of the most active investors in cybersecurity. Prior to joining Accel, Will worked at Summit Partners, where he was one of the investors, for example, in Darktrace. Welcome, Will.
Hey, great to be here.
And then finally, Ken Pentimonti, who's principal at Paladin Capital. He has extensive experience investing in deep tech and cybersecurity startups, and is a long-term partner and friend of LORCA. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Andrew.
Great, guys. Well, I'm really looking forward today to an interesting debate unpicking some of these cyber investment opportunities and challenges that face startups, which I'm sure is the day-to-day life that you guys lead, especially with the opportunities that COVID-19 presents. So I've got a few questions here, and I'd like to encourage the audience as well. If topics come to mind during this conversation, do feel free to raise those questions and we'll feed them into the panel. But the first question, just to get the debate flowing, and Karen, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. UK cyber investment is reaching record levels, as Henry told us. Perhaps despite the pandemic, or maybe because of the pandemic. Are we entering a golden age for UK cybersecurity startup growth, or are there opportunities beyond this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there are definitely opportunities beyond this year. I mean, I think it's an industry that has incredibly attractive dynamics for investors. And it's really still in infancy or at best adolescence. So I think it's still a pretty greenfield market. There's a lot that we still need to develop and work on. The demand still regularly exceeds supply for new solutions. And as you mentioned during the pandemic, we certainly moved to more digital rather than less digital, which means the demand continues to grow. And I think in a lot of ways, while there are quite a few companies that are doing really sophisticated solutions, there's also still a lot in first principles that we need to figure out. So for example, if you were to ask a CEO, could you tell me how many access points you have in your organization? Once you think about all of the desktops, laptops, mobile devices, iPads, wearables, does anybody really know the answer to that question? And mostly the answer is no. Even if you go to what data do you have, where is it? Most people still struggle to answer those kinds of questions. So there's still a huge opportunity and a huge market. And it's also an interesting opportunity in that it's never solved. So this is a problem that never has an endpoint or an end solution. It's constantly migrating and changing and moving.
It's really interesting the way you described that, Karen. So yesterday we were talking about how COVID-19 potentially proliferates the endpoints and edge of an organization. And potentially what this crisis causes is an unlocking of enterprise IT budgets as it pertains to protecting the consumer devices that inevitably become part of the network. And Will, can I ask, in terms of your approach to marketplace and investments, how disruptive has COVID-19 been in your thinking as to how you go about qualifying a company?
In many ways, a lot hasn't changed for us, to be honest, Andrew. So we've been actively investing through COVID. I think as a team across all areas of software, we've made over 8 new investments since March. I think what has changed for us is just the channels by which we're interacting with companies. So rather than being in person, of course, we're now on Zoom and Slack. And that has some implications for getting to know entrepreneurs and actually investing. But broadly speaking, I think the message from us is we're actively investing and great companies are still getting funded and growing strongly. So I'm actually quite positive on the environment.
Yeah. And you mentioned there the actual delivery method of engaging with the potential in investees. Do you find it different being able to build up trust with someone you can't physically meet?
Yeah, when you think what has actually changed for entrepreneurs and investors looking at VC investment in the last few months, I think you hit on the key point there, Andrew, which is this challenge of trust. How do you build that trusted relationship with an investor that you're going to be working with for the next 8 to 10 years? So I think, for us and for founders, there's been a certain level of adaptation which has needed to occur. But it's not insurmountable by any means. As Henry mentioned in the prior session, we've just seen one of our portfolio companies, Sneak, raise $200 million during this environment. So I think the key thing for founders to think about is how to be very transparent through the process. Have your story, have your information, have all the data ready to share with investors, and just be ready for very open discussions. And we're doing the same from our side. So I think there's lots of reasons to be positive about new rounds getting done.
That's really good to hear, Will. So, I mean, just building on this point of trust and engaging with potential potential investor opportunities in a virtual format. And Ken, if you wouldn't mind taking this one. So, we've looked at the stats, and in my intro, I referenced the fact that you're seeing a potential in-year boom for cyber investments, which is fantastic news for all of us. But we're also seeing an alarming stat around the amount of funding that's going to startups raising money for the first time. Do you think there's anything in that ability to build up trust in the virtual format of engaging with the potential investment opportunities that is holding the first-time funding back?
Yeah, I do think there are probably a number of factors that go into that, but I do think that's part of it. It's the team and the founders of those kinds of really early stage companies, the ones looking for first rounds of institutional financing, are so critical to the investment decision. And I do think that these COVID times make it more difficult. Just what Will was describing, where we have to use other channels of communication, and it does make it more difficult to build up that trust and back those really early stage teams where there's not a lot of other things to hold on to. If you're an investor, it's you're looking at the team and an idea and a business plan, and so I do think that's part of it. I think that as well, companies at the really early stage, are looking for a certain type of investors, angels and seed funds, and I think in high net worth individuals, I think some of those folks have, put things on hold a little bit more than us institutional investors, where we've got money to put to work, and I think we have a long-term view and are working through this. And as Will said, I think for the most part, we were doing a lot of things virtually anyway prior to COVID. And so that's maybe a little bit more of a transition for other types of investors that would invest in those companies looking for the really early those first rounds of financing. So I think there are a few different factors. I'm still very bullish. I think that's probably a blip. That the really good technologies, the ones that have great longer term opportunities, will eventually get funded. But certainly there's some short term issues that we all have to play through.
Yeah, thank you, Ken.
One of the things that I think is a challenge for early stage cybersecurity companies. Cybersecurity ranges from relatively simple, elegant solutions to everyday problems to really difficult, deep tech companies. And for most investors, they don't necessarily have a specific vertical in cybersecurity where they have deep tech experts there. And if you're a really early stage startup company, it's not that simple to be able to diligence the technology because you can't just go see it in action in places. So I think often for especially the particularly deep tech early stage companies, they really need to either find somebody who is a specialist in the area or going back to Will and Kenneth's point, there has to be a lot of trust in the founders. And often that comes through the founders' track record or background. And we often see founders coming out of military intelligence, which is generally a good sign. So it's either usually based on trust or somebody in the organization, the investment organization, having really deep technical experience. Whereas part of the reason I think we see really strong valuations for later stage cybersecurity companies is because more generalist investors can get their head around it when they see that you've got somewhere between $1 million and $100 million in revenue coming from sophisticated customers, and you can just go see that the product works. So it's not that surprising that the demand is greater for the slightly more proven companies where we can go diligence the customers in addition to just understanding the technology.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. So thank you, Karen. Can we just flip to the relative maturity of the UK cyber ecosystem versus those mature markets such as the US and Israel? I'm just wondering whether the funding trends that Henry ran us through earlier on around seeing, record year in 2020, beating a prior record year in 2019, does that reflect your view on how the UK cyber ecosystem is starting to mature? And, are you seeing potential stars of the future along the lines of the Dark Trace, the Digital Shadows, the Privatars that are emerging? Do you see potential for the UK market really to grow and produce those potential unicorns? And can we start with Will?
Yeah, happy to jump in on that. Look, I think it's an exciting time for cybersecurity companies from all different geographies, whether it's from Israel, Europe, UK, US. There are great companies being founded and being built all the time. So on a global basis, I think there's lots of reasons for optimism. I think the trends that we're seeing that Henry pointed out are actually pretty global. So we've seen increased investment in all of those regions where we invest. That said, I think there are reasons for optimism in the UK. I think when I look back 5 years ago, investing in Dark Trace for the first time, there weren't too many sort of scale-ups in the ecosystem at that point. Now I look around and there's, of course, Immersive Labs, Tessian, CallSign, Privatar, Sneak, and many others besides. And I think the thing about an ecosystem is it often takes a first few pioneering companies to create that ecosystem. And then from those companies comes a wealth more talent. So I'm extremely optimistic, given the current flow of companies we've been seeing, that the next 5 years are going to be even more prolific and even more impactful than the last.
And Ken, is that a view you would share?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree with Will wholeheartedly. I think a big thing, one of the biggest factors is what he just mentioned, which is as the large companies, the ones that have kind of led the way, spawn people from their organizations. They will start new companies themselves, and it does facilitate an ecosystem. I think that it helps as some of those companies that Will just mentioned, and there are many others, start to see exits. I think that's really when you start to that's when folks free up and really go to look to to start up new things. Many of the companies that Will mentioned are still private entities and still growing themselves. And so while they'll spin off some folks, I do think as they see, as a lot of those companies start to see exits, it will even accelerate. But I think in addition to that, the UK is doing a lot of really very interesting things. LORCA is a great example, but there are lots of different avenues that are supported by the government and the private sector that are helping young cyber startups in the UK. And I think there's a huge effort to facilitate new technologies and entrepreneurs coming out of university and other places where I think that's going to pay off. That doesn't happen overnight, but I think that as I say, the UK more so than many other geographies is really setting up a platform and ecosystem to allow those entrepreneurs to get to the next level and then hopefully be attractive to investors like ourselves.
Well, it's great to hear that validation, Ken. And Karen, earlier on we mentioned briefly about enterprise IT budgets. And I guess there's competing theories around whether COVID-19 will cause budget constraints within the enterprise and therefore limit technology spend. Likewise, the proliferation of the endpoint, the scale of the network, the scale of the security challenge, especially when there's lots more remote working. Is there anything coming through your conversations with potential investment opportunities that would lead you to a conclusion one way or the other? Do you think budgets will be unlocked, or do you think that they potentially are constrained for the coming months and years?
Yeah, from what we're seeing, they're certainly being unlocked. I mean, this problem is becoming a bigger problem, and COVID and remote working have made it a bigger problem. I also think we're seeing a lot more, in addition to the private markets, government support. And I think going back to kind of the UK as a market, I think the UK is often one of the target customer markets first, whether it's an Israeli-based company or European-based company, in part because what we've seen is UK government tends to act a little bit more quickly to try new things. Whereas if we look at, for example, the US State Department, the companies we're involved in, it takes a much longer process to get in there. But once you're in there, involved with one company that's got a pilot project there, it's called a pilot. It's a multi-million-pound contract that spans 5 years. And if that is a successful pilot, then the contract value is a massive multiple of that. So I think both for private markets and public markets, we're seeing that there's definitely more budget available. And I think that trend will continue.
That's good to hear. And you mentioned government activity there. And, we can't avoid the current debate on geopolitics and particularly around sovereignty of technology. Do you see that potential debate going beyond this year and causing an opportunity, particularly for sovereign-based companies, so UK cyber companies building British technology? Do you see that as a potential differentiator in your investment decisions? Will?
For us to date, it's not been a critical consideration. Honestly, we look for companies that can build global champions wherever they come from. So yeah, for us, that's not something we think about too much. Do I expect that the topic will sort of rage on following ARM and others? Yeah, I think we'll still be talking about it in a few months, but honestly, it's not top of mind for us right now.
And Ken, any different views? Or?
No, we look at it very, very much the same way. For us being headquartered and kind of rooted in the United States, we certainly look for companies that can eventually scale there. That's such a huge market. That there, such a so many buyers for many of the cyber technologies, regardless of where they come from initially. But yeah, look, we're looking for companies that can scale globally as well. We think cyber is a global issue. As companies continue to do things more and more digitally, cybersecurity will become an increasing need throughout. And so I see sovereignty as hopefully becoming less and less of an issue going forward. There'll continue to be political issues, and there are places like China and Russia and those kinds of places where we as an investor stay away from, just because of some of the political issues. But putting those places aside, I think we're looking for businesses that can that have technologies that are applicable globally.
And Karen, earlier on we were talking about the use of Zoom and other video tools to engage with investment opportunities and the kind of funding life cycle. What advice would you give to founders and management teams around how to present themselves best in that first moment on a video? And it's so great to see kind of the backgrounds and almost the homes and family life of people that we can see over their shoulders. But what are you looking for in that first engagement? How do they grab your attention? How do you start to deliver that trust?
Yeah, it's not really different than it would be otherwise. I mean, it's are they qualified to do what they're doing? So can we trust the founders is always the most important part of every investment decision, regardless of sector. So understanding their own backgrounds, their track records, why they're doing what they're doing, and why they've made sure that they have enough expertise in the business to be qualified to do this. Those are really important things. One thing that I think a lot of founders forget to do is show us the product. They spend a lot of time talking about the market and the opportunity and why they're qualified to do it. Those things are important, but we also need to see the actual product. So be prepared to demo, if it's a piece of software, be prepared to demo the piece of software, et cetera. And I would say, don't panic if you've got a kid that runs in the room or a dog that knocks something over. We're all very used to that by now. It is preferable if we can hear you. So if you're not in a room full of family, that probably works well. And then one thing I would advise, it's best to have more than one person on the call who can answer any given question, because we have had situations where a team member just keeps cutting out or gets locked out, and then we have to stop for a while because there's nobody else on the team that can answer specific questions. So redundancy and the ability to answer questions would be helpful.
Well, fantastic tips there, Karen. And Ken, obviously we've had many conversations about your plans of the UK market and how excited you are about it. Under the banner of cybersecurity, this week we've delved into everything from identity to social media to electoral reform and things like that. Is there a particular theme within cyber that's particularly exciting you this year and beyond, or a couple of subsets that you're really interested in?
Well, that's the great thing about cybersecurity is that it's really dynamic, and we believe a whole host of really exciting subsectors, areas that that we think are opportunities now and will be here in the future. There are really some transformative new technologies that are that are coming up even outside of cybersecurity, but affect cybersecurity, and we think will have a huge impact in the areas that we invest. Areas such as AI. We think that obviously we're seeing a proliferation of AI companies. Some of those are doing security-related things, some are not. But that's going to have a massive impact on what people are able to to achieve with their cybersecurity systems. And so we actually just made an investment in that sector recently, and certainly looking at a number of others. The cloud people continue to put their data, their information on the cloud. Being able to securely utilize the cloud, and feeling like you've got trust in using the cloud is a really important area. And then there's a huge cybersecurity talent shortage. So we're big believers in companies that Immersive Labs is an example of that, but companies that are training and educating various types of people within organizations around security. We think there's a huge and growing need for those kinds of automated training that's scalable and that can reach a large number of folks in an efficient fashion. And so those are just a few areas that we think are really exciting. And as I say, it's the great thing about this area is it is so dynamic, and just like Karen said before, it's unending. Just when you're never fully secure, and just when you think you might be, there are other attack vectors that come up, and the need for underlying cyber security technologies to help you deal with those.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that, Ken. And we've come to the moment, guys, where we need to wrap up and get into one of our keynotes, which we're so excited about. I really wanted to thank you all for committing your generous time over the course of the last 20 minutes or so. And particularly, it's so great to hear your positivity on the marketplace, the unflinched nature of how you're approaching the marketplace. And speaking on behalf of the UK cyber ecosystem, thank you so much for participating in our market. And we look forward to helping you in the future.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks.
So, as I said, thank you to all of our panelists. It's been such a great pleasure to host you at LORCA Live, and it's fantastic to get under the skin of the cyber investor community. Before we continue, I'd like to flag an opportunity for all those startups who are looking to currently raise investment. If there is a cyber startup out there who's looking to raise investment between £4 million and £100 million, the Department for International Trade has launched a new program of activity where they will support you to go into the international investor community and give you the best chance of being able to access those marketplaces. There is a short window of time when this is available. Applications close on Friday, so please do feel free to get in touch with anyone within the LORCA team and myself, and we'll give you further details, but a big opportunity for the Department of International Trade to help us. Now, it's my great honour to introduce one of the leading entrepreneurs in British cyber. Talking to us today about his experience founding, growing and scaling Digital Shadows is James Chapple. James is the co-founder and chief innovation officer at Digital Shadows, one of the most successful British cyber startups of all time. Having raised nearly $60 million in funding, the company is going from strength to strength. Digital Shadows, as I'm sure you all know, work with some of the largest companies in the UK and around the world, and are officially awarded the most awarded solution in digital risk protection. Welcome to LORCA Live, James.
Thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate inviting me to participate. It's a real honour to share the stage with so many esteemed people. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, James.
Just to introduce Digital Shadows for those of you who don't know us, we run a solution for digital risk protection. And basically what that means is we're looking at the internet, helping our customers to manage data loss, help them manage their brands online, help them look at the security of things like development operations, help them look at threats on the dark web, help them manage their attack surfaces, and help give them insights into threats online. And it's been a really interesting time. I guess I remember very well the point at which the UK government sort of announced that it was time for everyone to go and work from home. And it was sort of, we realized that we were at sort of a big change in the way that we were going to need to work when that happened. So I remember very vividly the day where we sort of had to go into lockdown and send everybody home. I think it's fair to say that we're blessed to be a digital business, and I know many folks working in cybersecurity are digital businesses. So, in some respects, we're really lucky to have the opportunity to, carry on business in a remote fashion. And in fact, I do feel, honoured and privileged that we're lucky enough to operate in a sector in that way. I think also, interestingly, though, I think a lot of people had uncertainty. There was a lot of uncertainty at that time. So clearly, not everybody knew exactly what was ahead, both economically or across our customers. But I guess if you think about the security industry, we're quite often dealing with uncertainty. That's what the security industry does. And especially if you work in something like incident response, or if you're working in an environment where there are new threats emerging all the time, I guess, we as entrepreneurs and as business owners are often working in this uncertain environment anyway. There's certainly a lot. There's a lot of different things that we're having to deal with every day. Now, of course, things like business continuity matter. Making sure that our business can continue to operate in this situation is important. Making sure that we've planned for that uncertain situation is really important. Managing things like finances when we don't know what's exactly around the corner was really important. And the old rubric of running any business, striving for the absolute best at the same time as managing the risks, sort of remains really, really important too. But I think we want to help wherever we can, and we want to try and ensure that we are good partners for our customers. And I think we, and I know a number of other cybersecurity scale-ups and startups have looked for the opportunities in this, and try to make lemons out of lemonade out of lemons. So it's, we've had probably the most accelerated period of digital transformation in business history. We've probably sort of jumped sort of 3 to 4 years of digital transformation, investing in new technologies. I don't think there's ever been a time where we've relied on technology quite so much. And of course, a lot of the changes that all organizations made happened really, really quickly. They had to, in order to maintain business operations. And I think, there's a tendency, historically in our industry to sort of use, I really don't like this. I've seen sort of industry use fear, uncertainty, and doubt to sell products, and I've always really disliked that approach. And I think actually what's been really some of the good that's come out of the current situation when working with customers is we're actually sort of making security an enabler. You're sort of saying, look, we know you've got to carry on operating your business. We want to be your partner by your side to make sure that as you do that, you're doing so in as secure a way as you possibly can. And if you think of, it's been really interesting watching the issues sort of evolve. So, right from, the debates around video conferencing right at the beginning of lockdown, what is the right platform to use? And various people have made different decisions along that line, which is quite interesting. Through to, do you allow your employees to use their IT, their IT that they have at home versus use corporately provided materials? Have you accelerated moving sort of things to the cloud much more quickly? Has that brought new risks with it? There's actually a bunch of really important things to think through. And actually, one of the things that I've found value in the partnerships we've had with our customers is by helping them explore these. And I think whilst we're always focused on how technology plays a role in helping businesses sort of operate, I think there's been some new way, the scale and speed at which that's happened has meant that there's been new discoveries, and that's not just in terms of the way that the technology used, it's also looking at how the threat has evolved with it as well. So just watching businesses make more use of things like third-party storage, looking at how threat actors have exploited those situations have all been really important for any CISO or any security leader to consider. So I think for me, it's been really important to focus on the good and focus on enabling business and really making security part of that conversation. I think the other sort of really interesting thing for me is I think I talk a lot about partnerships, but one of the really important partnerships has been the partnerships with our investors, and just having other people to talk to about how and compare with other entrepreneurs, how things are going for them, and having people to sort of discuss that with has been really, really valuable. So I think one of the things that often organizations haven't really sort of talked about that much in this is the sort of changing culture that you've had to sort of hit, right in the middle of this situation. So you've gone from, close working colleagues who are in an office environment. I'm lucky enough to be sat in our office today, one of the few days that we're back in the office. You've lost immediately those personal connections. You've got to do it all remote all of a sudden. And it's not to be underestimated how that changes the culture of business. We've got sort of new joiners joining us right in the middle of pandemic, where it's really good for remembering people's names, because if you're on Zoom, you've got people's names neatly put underneath their video feed, so it's useful for remembering colleagues' names. But if you're sort of you're finding yourself in situations where you're not having the chat around the coffee machine, or you're not going for a sort of swift beer after work. And I think we've had to sort of be quite creative about how we create cohesion in different teams, and getting people to be in more regular contact. So it's been really nice actually to bounce ideas off of other entrepreneurs. One of my favorite was the quarantinis that one of our peer groups created, where everyone had to make a cocktail at the end of the day and then compare them and rate them. Some quite fun competitions that we've had to sort of do the things that aren't sort of serious work sometimes, but actually do those really important team building exercises. So I think looking at how we learn from each other has been really important in this time, and we've certainly benefited from some of that. I think looking at the partnerships we have across not just sort of peers in industry, and I'm very lucky to work with a number of other entrepreneurs. We sort of sit on WhatsApp groups and exchange ideas. We talked a lot about some of the sort of commercial measures. How do you handle things like business rates? What do you do about sort of the relief schemes that are available, whether or not it makes sense to participate in those. All of that has been really good, actually, sort of talking with fellow entrepreneurs about what to do at the time. So yeah, I think it's been, I feel very blessed that we have amazing colleagues and amazing peers across the industry who've all sort of rallied very hard at this time and actually turned the situation into an opportunity. And that's probably been the biggest, most important part of all of this for me, is continuing business and making sure we carry on in the right way. I think probably the most important part of that is to watch very carefully both not only acquiring new business, but also retaining customers. You can think of sort of the customer retention challenge is almost doubled at this time because budgets have increased focus. Every single investment decision a business makes is looked at twice as hard than it was previously. So the value discussion, the discussion of when it comes to a renewal, making sure that that the value is being delivered, and making sure that you're embedded in the operations of the customer, and it is a true partnership between you and the customer, has become incredibly important, and at the moment ever more than it ever has been. So really doubling down on that focus for us has been, and I'm sure for any cybersecurity company, has been sort of doubly important. So it's quite interesting. New technologies have a different treatment from, say, sort of embedded technologies that have been around for decades. So if you talk to a CISO, they've got a budget for their firewalls, they've got a dedicated network. Their sort of stuff they're just going to renew because it's the sort of run-of-the-mill sort of IT infrastructure. Whereas if you're a newer technology, everything is challenged doubly hard. Now, I'm very glad to say, we've worn that very well, and it's worked out well for us. But it's not it's really important that we had to double down on that effort to ensure that was the outcome. So, and yeah, it's especially challenging if you're a new or emerging technology when you're at the beginning of that value conversation. So, it's really, really important to, make sure you've got the right plans in place. Make sure you're part of the security operations or a partner in that team. So yeah, I guess that's sort of some of my experiences of operating in this interesting time that we find ourselves in. I've really valued all of the people that I've been able to speak to over this time. Has certainly helped us a long way. I think, if I had to leave one piece of advice for entrepreneurs in this area, is you're not alone. Everybody is experiencing the challenges of the current time, and I think there's a tremendous amount that we can learn from one another. So I sort of really encourage that collaboration, and keep the dialogue going with as many people as you can.
James, thank you so much for all of that content and advice. And the one thing I've known from hearing you speak in the past is how generous you are in engaging with your peer group, not just telling the fantastic success story of Digital Shadows, but actually offering the level of advice you just had. So it's invaluable at this stage, particularly with COVID-19 and the crisis. And the beauty about what James has just been talking about is that on the LORCA Live platform that you're accessing this content through, you'll be able to play back some of this advice. And I would really counsel you to take some notes, have a think about how James has managed his period of time since March, because there's some really, really fantastic snippets in there, James. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So it's so great to hear of such a British cyber success story like Digital Shadows and hear about how they've achieved what they have so far with that particular focus on what's happened in the last few months. I'm now delighted to welcome our final keynote speaker for today. Dr. Jessica Barker is the co-founder and co-CEO of Sygenta. She's also the chair of Club CISO, which has a membership of over 300 information security leaders. Named as one of the UK's most influential women in cybersecurity, Jessica has a background in sociology and civic design, specialising in the human side of cybersecurity, including psychological and cultural factors. She's also about to publish her latest book, Confident Cybersecurity. Dr. Jessica Barker, welcome to LORCA Live, and thank you for providing your keynote. The platform is all yours.
It's a real pleasure to be here. It was fantastic to listen to the panel where some really expert advice was shared, and a true pleasure to be following James. A lot of what he said, I think, parallels with some messages that I want to convey today. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. What I'm going to be speaking about for sort of the next 10 minutes is how events of 2020 have influenced cybersecurity landscape. I'm going to look very briefly at some of the variety of career opportunities that there are in cybersecurity. As someone coming from a slightly different background, I'm always keen to shine a light on the fact that actually cybersecurity is really diverse. And on that note, I'm going to touch on why diversity in its truest sense is so important in cybersecurity. And I'll end with what I believe we should be thinking about now and in the future. So as James said, we have experienced this year a period of digital transformation, really like never before. Things that were planned in organizations for the next 3 years happened in 3 days. And nobody really could see it coming in the way that it happened. Physical space now matters less, and cyberspace matters much, much more than it did even a year ago. This has had a really big influence on organizations, but it's also had an influence on individuals, not just in terms of this blend of our work and our home life, our reliance on technology, but also when we think about the workforce, when we think about shaping teams, maybe as entrepreneurs, we need to recognize that physical boundaries just don't mean the same thing anymore. Some companies maybe still don't realize this, but this opens up a world of opportunity, both for individuals and for hiring organizations. So, of course, COVID-19 has transformed how organizations operate. And of course, cybercriminals haven't missed this. We've seen so many reports of the way in which cybercriminals are seeking to take advantage of the changing landscape. For example, James talked about FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the way that we as a cybersecurity industry have seeked to take advantage of that, to try and sell. And this is also a theme among cyber criminals. They always try to exploit fear, uncertainty, and doubt in their spear phishing attacks, in their social engineering attempts. And this year, with an environment where fear, uncertainty, and doubt has been higher than ever before, perhaps in the global population, they've certainly sought to take advantage of that. So, of course, the phishing emails that look like they're coming from the World Health Organization, asking for donations, the ones that look like they're coming from supermarkets, saying they're offering some kind of financial offer to help people, ones that say we have information on the cure, on the mask, if only you click this link, download this attachment, transfer some money. In fact, research from Proofpoint suggested that within weeks of lockdown, 80% of the threat landscape were using COVID-19 in one way or another. So many people have speculated that COVID-19 has been the most common, the biggest topic that phishing emails have ever had. The UK government has issued a report to say that they've seen more government-branded phishing scams using COVID-19 than ever before. And Google was stopping 18 million phishing emails a day, again, using COVID-19 as the theme. So the cyber criminals haven't missed this opportunity to take advantage of how we operate. And so obviously, as soon as lockdown happened, this had a huge impact on organizations. As was mentioned in the introduction, one of my roles is to be the chair of Club CISO, and we've been growing very rapidly. So we now actually have over 400 members, I'm delighted to say. And one of the great things about this community is the sharing of information. Every year at Club CISO, we ask a group of our CISOs for their reflections on security from their perspective. And this year, that survey coincided with the start of the UK lockdown. So we actually surveyed 100 members, all Chief Information Security Officers, just after the start of lockdown around Europe. And we asked them many questions around security from their point of view. The report's available, but I wanted to mention a couple of stats that have really stood out to me. One thing that was heartening is that most felt their organization coped well with COVID-19. They maybe wouldn't have expected their organization to be so resilient in the face of such a huge and very immediate digital transformation, but they actually felt like things went okay. We actually responded all right. When we asked the CISOs for their priorities for the next 12 months, what are their hot topics that they're looking at? Number one was culture, and number two was resilience. And as you just heard in the previous keynote, culture probably means something different now than it did a year ago. How we shape and uphold and move forward our organizational culture and our security culture, we have to think about that a little bit differently to how we thought about it when so many of us were more workplace based. What really stands out for me in terms of those two priorities is that, of course, technology has a role, but ultimately they're really much more about people. And this has been a growing theme of cybersecurity over the last couple of years, the importance of people. It's people that are being targeted more than ever in the cyber attacks that we're seeing. For example, as we saw in the Twitter breach of last month, when, of course, phone spear phishing attacks were utilized. In the weeks following what happened with Twitter, we have seen reports that have identified that many more organizations have been targeted with these kind of phone spear phishing attacks. So that's just one example of how we need more emphasis on people more than ever. These can be technology solutions, but people must be at the heart of what we're doing, a true understanding of people. And I talk about this in my newly published book, Confident Cybersecurity. One thing I was really keen to highlight was the diversity of the cybersecurity careers available. So in one of the chapters, I talk about what cybersecurity means to Taylor Swift, to footballers, to Kim Kardashian, to social media influencers. Cybersecurity isn't just for big organizations. It isn't just for entrepreneurs or for banks. It is for everybody. And if we think about this year, how we have relied on technology, that's opened up so many opportunities, but of course also vulnerabilities. So suddenly everybody's worried about Zoom bombing, and we're having to explain to people who maybe had never used video conferencing before what they can do to be more secure while they're still enjoying catching up with friends, going to a virtual pub, maybe even going to a virtual wedding. Cybersecurity, of course, has technology at its heart, but as I said before, it's very much about people. And this covers awareness, behavior, communications, law, HR, and so many more disciplines. Diversity is really important in cybersecurity, and we need diversity and inclusion in its truest sense. So there's a famous quote, "Talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not," from Leila Janah. And this really highlights the fact that if we do not have diverse teams, if as an industry we're not as diverse as we could be, then we're not as talented as we could be. We're not as strong as we could be. And that means our organizations and in fact our countries are not as secure as they could be online. So if you're seeking to get into the industry, how do you do it? And again, it's something I talk about in the book because there's no necessarily one clear pathway. It can be very hard to know how to get a foothold in the industry. One of the most important things to do is to network. And while that can seem challenging in this virtual environment, it's harder to go up and just chat to someone at an event. There is also an opportunity. We can attend online events around the world in a way that was so much more restrictive 6 months ago. I'm a big advocate in cybersecurity of sharing information, sharing your perspective. And this is whatever stage, whatever role you have in the industry, you have an insight that you can share. And by doing so, you help people learn about you and about what you can bring to the industry. So think about what makes you different. What is your background? What is your perspective? Who are you and what drives you? Because that will be one of the most important things you can bring to a career or to a startup in cybersecurity. And the traits that really matter when we get to the heart of it are problem solving, having a learning mindset, being ethical, having a moral compass, caring about people, and considering how you communicate. Whatever role you have, you will be communicating with people one way or another. So working on communication skills is fundamental. And as an industry, we have a responsibility to nurture those who want to be part of this industry, part of this community. So we really need to continue to develop an inclusive and a collaborative industry and community. In 2020, the power of Black Lives Matter has really helped to shine a light on conversations and issues that people in the last few years maybe were not wanting to confront to the extent that we now are doing. Black Lives Matter movement has opened up conversations, highlighted racism, and I think most importantly, highlighted that it's not enough not to be racist. We need to be anti-racist. In the Club CISO report, over 70% of CISOs said that they thought their hiring policies could be more diverse, could be more inclusive. So there's a recognition throughout the industry that we can do more. And in security and technology, this is really important because some of the issues that were highlighted by the Black Lives Matter movement have a very real world impact when it comes to technology. For example, facial recognition technology identified and researched by MIT found that it recognized white male faces more than black female faces. This is absolutely fundamental to people's security. Imagine that kind of technology being put in self-driving cars, in AI systems. Suddenly you see, actually, we really need diversity. We really need inclusion to make sure that we design and we test systems with different people and different communities in mind. So this is what matters in the future of cybersecurity. What really matters is equality, inclusion, diversity, tackling human and AI bias. What really matters is culture and resilience. People and how they behave is fundamental. And this includes both end users and it includes the cyber criminals that, of course, we're trying to defend against. And fundamentally, what we need to do is continue the move away from blaming people and thinking about how we can include and empower them so much more in our solutions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Jessica Barker. And there's so much in there that I need to reflect upon, and I'm so glad that I get the chance to watch it back again. But the particular thing that struck me, and I'm going to go away and have a real think about this, is how one continues the progress the industry's made on the human side of cybersecurity, whilst we've transformed into a remote working environment and the cultural shift that you quite clearly outlined there. How do we maintain that diligence, that connection, particularly with employees, but broader society as well? And how do we make sure that not only we don't take a few steps backwards on that progress, but actually use it as a potential to engage a lot further? So thank you so much for being generous with your time. It was absolutely enthralling.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining our third daily live broadcast. We still have 2 days to go this week. Hopefully, like us at LORCA and the investors and entrepreneurs you've heard from today, you're actually feeling very optimistic about the landscape for cyber entrepreneurs and the future growth of the UK cyber ecosystem. Tomorrow, we have some brilliant speakers at the cutting edge of national cybersecurity. We'll also be discussing the new risk landscape for corporates caused by COVID-19. We'll be here as usual at 4:30 p.m, and I really hope to see you then.